In my last talk that I gave, I spoke in an abbreviated narrative form about the historical conditions which led to the creation of what is termed the Elgin Depositions of 1646. This is taken from a book that I co-wrote with Dr. John Barrett at the University of Aberdeen. It was entitled Elgin's Love Gift, Civil War in Scotland and the Depositions of 1646. So this is part 2 of that talk. In 1645-46, the inhabitants of the small borough town of Elgin in the northeast of Scotland found themselves thrust into the front line of the civil war that racked the 3 kingdoms of King Charles's realm. Military forces, both friend and foes, ravaged the town. Houses were burnt, homes were looted, the people were terrorised, and the royal borough's pride affronted, and its kirk despoiled. The last talk told this story. The Elgin Depositions offered unrivalled insights into just one of the many little local triumphs and disasters that compose, indeed epitomise, Scottish national history. The Elgin Depositions speak in the authentic voices of ordinary Scottish people, the merchants, craftsmen, men and women, who, though they never went to war, were nonetheless true and faithful warriors of the national covenant. In this particular talk, I'm going to focus more on the actual document itself, its provenance, its composition and writing style, paleography. The early history and full provenance of the Elgin Depositions may be inferred from internal evidence and incidental circumstances. The paper, the ink, paleography, and the language all firmly place the document in the mid-17th century. The contents, of course, establish dates for the composition of the Elgin Depositions, both in document A, which is here, detailing the borough's individual losses, and document B, detailing the borough's communal losses. The writings relate to the occupation of Elgin by detachments of the Marquess of Huntly's George Gordon, the Strathbogie Regiment, and elements of the Marquess of Montrose, who was James Graham, his army in the months of February and May and 1645. The depositions relating to the communal losses also refer to the quartering and exactions of parliamentary forces by the armies of Archibald Campbell, the Marquess of Argyll, and John Middleton, Lieutenant General in the Covenanter Army during 1644-1646. The Elgin Depositions were sworn before commissioners appointed by the Scottish Parliament to take evidence on personal hurts and property damage. Parliament recognised that many individuals and communities had been impoverished by quartering, plundering, by its own forces, as well as by what was termed the common enemy. The Scottish Parliament's main concern was to establish the veracity and extent of the plundering that had occurred, because many individuals and communities were claiming that, having been plundered, they could no longer pay their dues to the Scottish Parliament, especially for the upkeep and maintenance of the Scottish Army. The first step in proving the truth of these claims was the appointment of a parliamentary committee to go with the army and collect data and write down the losses occurred as a result of the Civil War. The commissioners working for this committee had a wide remit to investigate the losses either by enemy or by their own forces. An Act of Parliament of 1646 established one uniform way through the whole kingdom for the trial of losses both by sea and land, that course be taken for their reparation. The tenor and the vocabulary of the Elgin Depositions reflect the language of the 1646 Act. I'll give you an example. And for the better clearing away of trial, that the party grieved or complaining may prove by sufficient witnesses that he had in his possession, immediately before the enemy came to his ground, or house, such goods and gear as he condescends upon in his complaint, and that the enemy, being there, they were taken away and destroyed by the enemy, and were never seen thereafter in these places. In Murray, matters came to a head in January 1646, when the shires of Elgin and Nairn lodged a formal collective protest against an assessment for tax purposes upon the war-ravaged province. This national tax demand, which arrived while Elgin was still under military occupation by the Royalist Gordons, was met not with anger but with despair. The response, preserved in the National Archives of Scotland, is a closely written 4-page petition addressed to the Lords of Council, appealing to their lordships' moderation and sensibilities to the miseries that have been inflicted in the province. For the purposes of easier understanding, I will modernise and anglicise the wording from the petition. As all sides in the Civil War claimed to be fighting for God, King and Country, reference is made first of all to His Majesty and to his proper inclination to justice, goodness and compassion to the people. This is then followed by a sycophantic expression where the petitioners state that their satisfaction that their being able to negotiate with persons so intelligent and full of honour that there was no need to reinforce and strengthen our petition with arguments from common justice, the laws of God, and the moral bonds which lie on them that rule over men, the practice of other nations and reasons of state, and such like. From the first paragraph, the petitioners stoically declined to mention their sufferings during the past 17 years of grievous and bloody war, all the spoiling, devastations and burnings, because it is true that the conscience of our duty, the hope of some notable and lasting advantage to us and the generations to come, with the daily expectation that a short time should finish our troubles, did so animate and bear us up, that for many years, albeit our bowels were consumed, yet as if we had felt no pain, we did quietly endure the miseries which so many changes did produce, until now the blood and vital spirits being spent, all estates and families, corporations and bodies of the land are deeply and irrecoverably consumed and worn to nothing. How many hundreds of families are there within a little compass, if honour and tenderness did not restrain them, who should willingly turn their back upon all that they have and bid farewell their native country and be content that their acquaintance and dwelling place should know them no more. The writers continued in this doleful manner, describing the heavy burden which the tax assessment would place on their war-weary community. They begged their lordships not to measure their ability to pay the tax by their fervency and their zeal in our undertakings great things in the years past. This has so wasted and consumed the whole land. Nay, it could have been imagined that our troubles could have run this length of time. Men would have shrunk and fainted ere they entered upon such difficulties. Finally, the petitioners invited their lordships to compare their burdens with any people or nation of Europe, including their neighbour England, who perhaps, it was contended, was not suffering as much, or certainly not contributing all it might. The response of the Lords of Council to this position, if any, is not preserved in the national records. Although most plundering went uncompensated, there were notable exceptions. Parliament was careful to look after its own members. Brodie of Brodie, Parliamentary Commissioner for Elginshire, benefited from several acts recognising the poverty of his estate. Burnt and wasted by the barbarous rebels. Among other lords compensated for their losses was Brodie of Lethen, who was a Commissioner to Parliament for Nairnshire. Lethen's losses were substantial. His house of Lethen was besieged by James Graham and his adherents, who, not being able to prevail, burnt all his barns, barnyards and corns, plundered all of the estate, and took away 800 oxen and cows, 1,800 sheep and goats, and 200 horse and mares. Other local lords and dignitaries also received compensation from Parliament. John Hay, the Provost of Elgin, and also the borough's Commissioner to Parliament, received an interim payment to tide him over, until he received his full compensation of £3,008, 6 shillings and 8 pence, which was an enormous sum of money for that particular time period. No other Elgin citizen is known to have received any compensation. It is not known if the subsequent roll of losses was ever even submitted to the central authorities. Certainly nothing exists in the national records. The Elgin depositions are contained in 2 documents. Document A, which we have here, which is a fragment of it, comprises a substantial paper roll containing a manuscript record of sworn testimony concerning the losses of over 200 individual claimants. Document B comprises a single original paper, manuscript page, detailing the general losses of the community. Neither document is complete. Document A comprises of 30 sheets of testimonies pasted together to make a complete roll. Document B itemizes the costs of the various quarterings and communal losses. The town's losses are written in a confident 17th century hand. The first word of each paragraph is writ large and dignified with a flourished initial letter. The 202 surviving depositions of Document A were written by 3 clerks, each with a distinctive hand and personal quirks in spelling and abbreviation. These clerks were not involved in the writing of Document B, which is the work of a 4th writer. All 4 principal deposition writers were clearly competent administrative clerks and skilled copyists, cooperating closely with the compilation of the Elgin depositions. Clerk number 1 wrote a bold, upright hand. Clerk 2 wrote a bold, sloping, and sometimes careless attacking hand. And Clerk 3 wrote a small, sometimes tiny, upright hand. The 4th clerk, responsible for Document B, wrote a confident, clear script with letters a little squared, distinctly prominent, tall, sloped F and a long S, and notable large capitals to open new paragraphs. The variation in writing styles among the hands of the 4 clerks, small or large, careful or careless, are within the usual range for the time. The scripts employed are legible, everyday business hands. The principal scripts are characterized by the usual secretary hand letter forms, typified by a straggle-tailed H, a high-rolled backed E, a single-stroke D, and a convoluted K, and distinctive forms of long and double and terminal S's. There is no evidence of the humanistic letter forms that were already commonplace on mainland Europe and in England. In this, the commissioners' clerks were in the Scottish mainstream and almost a century behind the most bureaucratic practice. Sentences, paragraphs, and proper names commences variously with ordinary small letters writ large, and convoluted large forms clearly intended to possess the dignity conveyed by a capital in modern usage. The punctuation is sparse, if not non-existent. However, this defect does not inhibit comprehension, since the text is clearly written with careful consistency and correct syntax. 17th century spelling is occasionally disconcerting to modern readers, though each clerk is remarkably consistent and thoughtful. Sorry, let me start that one again. 17th century spelling is occasionally disconcerting to modern readers, though each clerk is remarkably consistent, and thoughtful reading overcomes occasional difficulties. Because 17th century spellings were not standardized, clerks adopted phonetic approaches, which allows the sensitive modern reader to hear the authentic accents of the time. The plural terminal is and the rendering of words such as meesters for masters, ocht for 8, nichts for nights, 30 for 30, and brant for burnt convey with clarity the timbre of Scottish voices, silent for more than 3 centuries. The use or non-use of double letters and the addition of terminal E may be unfamiliar, but are not necessarily incomprehensible. Neither is the use of terminal IE, where modern usage prefers a Y. Here and there, the clerk's preferred spelling may cause some consternation to the modern reader, as for instance with a word such as glyphis, which is actually gloves. Scottish syntax preserved Old English and Middle English ES and IS plural and possessive terminations. These archaic usages perhaps may appear quaint to the modern reader, who are nonetheless correct. Possessive apostrophe was introduced into English only in the latter part of the 17th century. At the time of the deposition, the letter J was not even in the alphabet. Thus, a name like James would be spelled as IAMES. Thus, the letter I, large I or little I, could either be a consonant or a vowel. The initial large I for item and large I for James are written identically, and small I serves as both vowel and consonant, as in a word like perjury, which is spelt Periurie. Small I was also used as a Roman numeral, and the 17th century alphabet did not discriminate between U, V and W, which might be regarded as different forms of the same letter, and was used promiscuously as either a vowel or a consonant, hence W being called double U. Thus the clerks offer an array of spelling: silver as CILUER, away as AVAY, used as in WSEIT, others as in WTHERSIS, other as in VTHER, indweller as in INDUELLAR, and 11 for ELLEWIN. The Elgin depositions were sworn at a time when accounting practices were undergoing radical reform as a result of the widespread adoption of Arabic numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and the new arithmetical methods they facilitate. The clerks used both Roman numerals I, IJ, little i's, the V's, X's, etc., L for 50, C for 100, M for 1,000, and also Arabic numerals, as well as spelling out numbers in words, sometimes all in the same valuation. Money was expressed in punds, shillings and pennies, pounds, shillings and pennies, PUNDIS, shillings as SCHILLINGIS, and pennies as in PENNEYES. The score 20 was much favoured, as was the value of the merk, which was a Scottish valuation, which is 2/3 of £1, which is 13 shillings and 4pence. This obviously added to the arithmetical challenges. As previously stated, there is no record of the depositions ever being submitted to the central authorities, and under the Commonwealth and Protectorate of Oliver Cromwell, all hopes of compensation evaporated, and the Scottish Parliament ceased to exist. The English who governed the country despised Scottish Presbyterianism, and there was no one left to applaud or reward Elgin's faithfulness to the Covenants. The Elgin depositions were, however, preserved as a testimony to the sufferings of the community, and as evidence of its gracious state. The Covenanted Borough's roll of honour was carefully placed, indeed reverently enshrined in the town's records, and there it lay for generations, unobserved, forgotten, and its importance unrecognised until the late 20th century.